I think so.
The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, using rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
And today, joined by Amy Peikoff. Hey, Amy, how's it going?
It's going okay, kind of crazy and hectic. You told me last night that you canceled a trip. Is that right? That's why we're here?
More than 1 day's notice. What's up with that? I gave you 24 hours. People just complain.
And so then it was very good that I had my program notes ready early, because then I had a situation come up. So I had to ask you, could we do it an hour earlier? So here we are, and there's probably no one watching us because, I mean, it was, announced so late and then shifted an hour earlier. So
There are a
maybe
few
everyone...
people here. We've got a small contingent on Facebook and on YouTube and on Periscope. So people are here. And yes, I was supposed to go to Panama City, and they canceled the event at the last minute. So I did not go. So here I am for another few days before I go on my massive trip to Dallas and then to Asia. So.
And I saw some announcement that you were giving a ridiculous number of lectures in a short period of time.
To 12 lectures in Asia in 2 weeks and a bit. So should be fun. Five
That's
different
good.
cities, 5 different countries, 2 talks at least in every country. Looking forward to meeting people in Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Seoul, South Korea, and Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. So, hey, if you're listening to the show, look forward to seeing you next week or the weeks following that.
I tried to live a fraction of your lifestyle this past week. And you want to hear what happened?
Yeah.
Okay, so I went to Chicago for a quick turnaround trip. I got to speak with Jonathan Hoenig and Richard Salzman at the Heartland Institute. It was a really fun panel. But I had an early flight out Wednesday from California to Chicago. And then I had an early flight back, which is even earlier California time, on Thursday. So these 2 nights I get almost no sleep. And so then I learned something new this week. I mean, I learned a lot of new things this week, but one particular thing I will share with you, which is that if a couple days after having virtually no sleep, you drink a quantity of alcohol that doesn't even make you drunk, right, you might still have a really nasty hangover the next day simply because of lack of sleep.
I believe that. I think that's right. I don't do well in alcohol anyway, so
yeah.
A glass of wine is all I can take. But yes, sleep magnifies the negative. Lack of sleep magnifies all the negative effects.
I learned that via Google the day after. So, yeah. Because I was not drunk at all. I had half a margarita, and the next day I suffered. So that was the learning experience. But the Chicago event was really good. I put in the program notes over at don'tletitgo.com a link to the YouTube video of the panel that was hosted by the Heartland Institute. So thanks to Heartland, thanks to Jonathan Hoenig, of course, he got the textbook of Americanism project started in the first place. And
absolutely.
Yeah, it was an excellent idea. And so in my little talk, what I try to do is talk about the American sense of life, how it's saved us from totalitarianism, but how Rand warned that we need to make the philosophy explicit if we're going to continue to stave off totalitarianism, and how Jonathan's book is part of that effort. So thank you, Jonathan. That was fun. And
good. No, it's a great book. Everybody should go out and buy it. Textbook for Americanism. A lot of new content by Ayn Rand that you've never seen before. And then, of course, a bunch of new essays from Amy, from Jonathan, from Richard,
from you,
Greg Salameri, Onkar, and a bunch of other people. So really, really good buy. Good book. I've got a number of copies here behind me. So go buy it. Let me make a quick announcement, because I need to do this every show now. So I'm doing a workshop on public speaking in July in Miami. And if anybody is interested, it's you can email me at Yaron@yaronbrookshow.com. yaronbrookshow.com, and I'll send you a link to get more information about it and to register. So Yaron at yaronbrookshow.com. It'll be on the weekend of July 19th. Start on a Friday, go through Saturday, half of Sunday. And it costs money, so it's not going to be cheap. My time's not cheap, but we'll see. It should be a blast. If you want, any of you out there want to improve your public speaking skills, any of you out there ambitious in terms of what you want to do in terms of public speaking, I'm pretty good at it. And I've been doing it for a long time. And I've got some tips and ideas and suggestions to share with you. And you guys, I think, will have fun. It'll be a blast. It'll be a blast and an educational experience.
When I grow up, I'm going to be you, and I'm going to do those too. Okay.
You've got plenty of time before you grow up.
I'm trying so hard. I'm just not, Okay, so are we ready? Today, the title I made because
I noticed.
Yes, none of the above. Again, I'm throwing this title in your face.
Let it go.
I will not let it go. This is so bad. None of the above. Actually, what I did is I did a play in the content in the program notes on the line from the song, the Duran Duran song, None of the Above. In there, they say, money, power, holy roads, freedom puts my faith in none of the above. So we have some stories concerning money, some concerning power, and some concerning holy roads. But yes, I do want to just put this title in your face again, Yaron, because it's such a good title.
None of the above.
It's wonderful. It's none of the above in the sense of nothing above the individual, whether it's spiritual or some, secular group, state or otherwise. So there's that. And then none of the above, we are not.
We don't belong
conservative.
To
we're not liberal. We are not even libertarian. We're different from them too.
We're not nothing. We're something else. We're none of we're objectivists.
We are. Okay. So anyway, no, I'm really not trying to do that, but you did get me at the last minute, and this is what occurred. So go over to the program notes, don'tletitgo.com. You'll see the links and everything else to all the stories that I've got here. Got a couple stories having to do with money, big money first. And one of them is a verdict that was returned today in a California court. Big news out there. A $2 billion+ verdict against Monsanto. And it's for a couple who said that they got cancer from Roundup, which is that weed killer that you can spray all over your yard. This is apparently the biggest verdict so far
against a company. Wow.
Yeah.
$1 billion.
Yes.
It was, by the way, 55 million in compensatory damages. So 55 million just to compensate them for medical expenses and the pain and suffering. But then, just to be clear, and I don't know how this is even allowed, because I don't see where the justice is here. $2 billion in punitive damages. That is to penalize the company. $2 billion just for being named Monsanto.
I mean, the idea of punitive damages is that they're supposed to actually feel it. And so supposedly the judge will look at what are the revenues and the profits of the company. Bayer is now the parent company that is going to be affected. There was one guy who was gleefully tweeting out there that he hopes that Bayer is now going to be put out of business because of this. Why do you want Bayer put out of business entirely?
It's a Swiss company, I think. Well, because they're foreigners, so,
Oh, would that be it? Okay.
Hate to foreigners is a good thing. I don't know why anybody would hate Bayer. I mean, there are pharmaceutical companies, and we know that there is a general attitude in the culture that is anti-pharmaceuticals, that is very, thinks drugs should be developed by the government. I guess that's what you take the profit out of drug discovery.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's not supposed to be any profit. And then, I didn't put it in here, but it occurred to me that there was also a headline today about generic drugs and how generic drugs are such a danger to you. So on the one hand, everybody wants generics to be allowed to be made, and now New York Times is having headlines about how they are dangerous to you. So do you want to have these brand name companies actually make a profit and still be able to exist, or do you want to go after them and say that they're the devil and we want to have as cheap a drugs as possible? That, you know, this is part of the whole
And in
background.
this case, I think, I mean, it's true. Punitive damages are meant to make the company feel it,
Mm-hmm.
so that they pay attention and they do something about it. But it strikes me as somewhat arbitrary that a jury can determine the size of it. I mean, I guess a judge can reconsider. I guess an appeal, they can reconsider the size of it. But there's no doubt in my mind, at least, that, and I don't know how jury selection was done, that it's not accident. This is Monsanto. I mean, I don't think there's any company that I know of in the world hated more than Monsanto. You know, everywhere I go, even libertarians, everybody, Monsanto's the devil because they developed GMOs. They genetically modified crops, and GMOs, of course, are evil. We're all going to die. It's one of those horrific things. Now, Roundup, I don't think is GMO. Roundup has this ingredient called glyphosate, which
Glyphosate,
a number of juries now have found causes cancer. I don't know what their expertise is exactly in that, but causes cancer. And on the other hand, the EPA, I'm citing the EPA. How scary is that? The EPA says, no, it's fine. It's not a carcinogen again at all, and it doesn't present any health risk. And one wonders, I mean, there's a whole, I remember there was a book years ago called Junk Science. Do you remember that book?
Yes, yeah.
Junk Science. And a lot of it had to do with carcinogens and the junk science around carcinogens and the whole profession of professional consultants that went around saying that everything was a carcinogen, and therefore, that is, there's a whole, field of the law, not field of the law, but lawyers who go out there and just sue everybody. And then they have all these experts that say, yes, that's a good. And what is the jury going to say? Are we going to side with a big evil corporation that we know has developed GMOs and therefore is a bad company? Or are we going to side with this poor couple in their 70s who've just gone through massive cancer treatment? And yeah, it's true that the lawyers get a third of the $2 billion, but we're going to, that doesn't matter. These are good lawyers because they're actually representing this couple. And it's an evil corporation, and therefore, it's, that's what we do. So, I mean, it's sad, but in a truly capitalist economy, a lot of how business would be regulated would be through lawsuits like this, and they would regulate their bad behavior. But I really do fear that the legal system has lost objectivity, and I'm not sure that the jury system is the best system equipped, or this jury system of people who don't know anything. Maybe we could have a jury system of experts. I wonder if you could do that. Like, to be on a jury to judge a carcinogen, you'd have to be a doctor, or you would have to be a medical researcher, and we get 12.
See, this is the thing, though, right? So I think that the theory behind this is that you have your expert witness, but then if there's a situation involving rights, you should be able to break it down and explain it to a jury of people of average intelligence such that they're capable of doing this.
But I wonder if that's true in a modern society in which the evidence here is very scientific.
Right.
It reminds me of it's not the same, but it reminds me of the OJ case. I mean, you're talking about DNA evidence, and the jury has no idea what DNA evidence, particularly 30 years ago, what DNA evidence is and how it works. And it seems that the more technical these things become, the more we need juries of experts who are just average people, not who don't have any interest in the case, but who have the capability, both the intelligence and the know-how, to understand the arguments that are made that are crucial to the case, right? The scientific evidence is crucial to this case. And of course, suits like this are not necessarily suits of, well, I mean, it is a violation of rights, but it's yes.
So do you want to hear this? So I looked up the World Health Organization statement that was linked to
Yeah.
in the article about whether glyphosate, is how I'm pronouncing it, is carcinogenic or not.
Yeah.
And again, the interesting thing is our own EPA, US EPA says no, it's not. But instead, the California court apparently decided to look at the World Health Organization statement. So this is what their statement says, and it's dated March 2015 in France, and it says there was limited evidence of carcinogenicity. You say that 12 times fast, I don't know, in humans for non-Hodgkin lymphoma. The evidence in humans is from studies of exposures, mostly agricultural in the USA, published since 2001, Sweden as well, Canada as well. It says, in addition, there is convincing evidence that glyphosate also can cause cancer in laboratory animals. It says United States Environmental Protection Agency originally classified it as possibly carcinogenic. After reevaluation of this mouse study, they changed the classification to evidence of non-carcinogenicity in humans. I cannot say that term. US EPA's scientific advisory panel noted that the reevaluated glyphosate results were still significant using 2 statistical tests, et cetera. And so they're saying they have sufficient evidence of carcinogenicity in experimental animals, at least. So it's animal evidence that they have in the first place.
According to the American Cancer Society, they don't know what causes lymphoma. They just don't know. I mean, the other question here
and there are a couple too, right? So they've been exposed to a whole bunch of the same things over that same, 3-decade period that they were referencing.
70s and cancers. Like, anyway, part of the issue is they both got exactly the same cancer. It about within 4 years apart, they got the same cancer. So the idea is they was exposed to something. But here's the other question. If we have regulatory agencies that give thumbs up or thumbs down on medication, drugs, chemicals, and so on, and a company then uses those drugs, should the company be liable given that they got approval from the regulators? I mean, it's not clear to me, what's the regulator for? If we're going to trust the legal system to regulate the behavior, then what do I need the regulator? So what they have double whammies, and the courts and the regulator can disagree. And I mean, it would be a lot cleaner if we actually had a free market. And more importantly, if people generally had a more objective approach to knowledge and to evaluating these kind of cases. It's not easy. No, it's not that it's not easy. It's really, really hard to link a product to cancer. And even the World Health Organization says it's a weak case. And yet it's strong enough in the eyes of this jury to give them $2 billion, even though it looks like a weak case. So it strikes me as the jury system has to be changed. And I don't trust anything today because I think the epistemology of the average American is so corrupt and so bad that I'm not sure I trust the ability to evaluate these complex scientific issues.
One of the lessons I would say for private companies is not to trust what either regulators or the law says. Don't rely on them for, some sort of immunity from liability. And the other example that comes up is one that I wanted to talk to you about, Yaron, which is what they're talking about with respect to social media right now, right? So here in the Monsanto case, maybe they were relying upon the EPA's representation that they did not consider this chemical to be carcinogenic, right? And so they go out and they market it, and they don't set aside, a certain amount of money that they might for lawsuits if they had thought that they would be held liable based on the representations of this United States-based regulatory body, right? Similarly, we have the social media companies who have been lured into saying, oh, we are an open platform, right? Because somebody decided that there was going to be this law that everybody, they say, oh, Section 230 says that as long as you are this wonderful open platform that is, open to all voices, et cetera, then you will be free from the liability that you would be if you weren't, because the only other alternative is being a publisher. Why? Because it says so in section 230 that your only alternative is to be this common carrier open platform, or suddenly you are a publisher. And in my view, that is really entrapment, but it's not, traditional entrapment is when somebody's actually guilty of a real crime. But in this case, they put this law out there, and all the social media companies say, okay, we better say that we're, the common carrier social media platform, that we're open to all voices, because if we don't, then suddenly we become a publisher. But there is something called a platform, and you can't write a law in the books and say, oh, well, we wrote a law in the books, and so we've defined away this third alternative, which is a platform that doesn't edit like a publisher does, right? They don't actually go into the individual unit of stuff and determine what the content is.
Selective. They're quite the contrary. A fraction of 1% of stuff is not published, which is the exact opposite of a publisher, which edits.
Yeah, but to me, the very crucial distinction is that whatever the unit of communication is, the unit of discourse is that's being published, which is a post.
Yep.
The platform does not edit it. It only exercises veto power, and it does it based on community standards. And so, forget Section 230. Section 230 is, in my thing, I just think it's bogus. It's entrapment for something that isn't a crime, because the proper standard would be, what would a reasonable platform owner do and be properly held liable for? If a reasonable platform owner, given today's technology, would be aware of an incitement to violence, a copyright violation, some sort of libel or slander, then yes. And, if they continue to allow that thing to be on their platform, then hold them liable. But otherwise, they are not publishers. They have not reviewed the content in advance of allowing it to appear on their platform. They haven't edited it, nothing. So, again, don't rely on the government and think that you're going to be immune from liability. We see this here with Monsanto. Now they're going to appeal, right? So this is, I guess, at the trial court level. And so we'll see what happens on appeal. These are the things that are important to know. This is what stage of litigation you're in.
Just to go back to your platform example, I mean, the problem with that is, the problem with the law is that it is referencing common carrier law. And there should have never been common carrier law. That is, the law of common carriers is that if you provide telephone service, you cannot discriminate between, you have to make a connection between every two phones.
No.
And that's where it comes from. So where does common carrier law come from? I mean, but all of that is bogus, because it does not recognize private property, because the airwaves, but even, I guess the phone wires were private, but private property over those wires, it was deemed that you couldn't discriminate. And you had to be a common carrier, which means all traffic flows through.
But that's also in exchange for some sort of a monopoly.
Yes, probably. So it's probably in exchange for monopoly. That's right. So it's the whole of the law with regard to telecommunications, which I think the internet and therefore the platform stuff all came from. They all came from telecommunications laws. All of it is based on a flawed view of telecommunications as so-called public utility, and granting monopoly powers over local telephone providers or national telephone providers, which when AT&T was broken up was not done away with. It also has to do with the fact that the bandwidth for Wi-Fi and for telephone and all of that is so-called publicly owned, is only for the most part leased to these companies. I mean, the whole thing is corrupt from beginning to end. There's no recognition in the law of real private property over the network you build, and your rights to use it any way you want.
You grew up in Israel. Did you guys have on your businesses, you go in a restaurant or whatever, and it says, "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone"? Anything like that there?
Where?
In Israel.
In Facebook?
No, in Israel. Do you have?
Oh, I don't know if we have that. I don't know if we have those kind of statements.
But people in the U.S. can remember. I mean, I guess I'm kind of old, but
They're still there. They're still there, but they can't actually use that, because if they discriminate based on sex or race or any of these things, then it's not allowed. So there's still some respect for private property when it comes to a restaurant. Not complete respect, but when it comes to the internet, when it comes to common carriers, the attitude is there's no respect for property rights at all.
yeah, I mean, Facebook is not nearly the same as any of those anyway. And certainly Facebook has not been granted some sort of a monopoly by government. But anyway, again, it's all a pretense, right? So I would not ever count on government to make a binding statement that something is not carcinogenic. You would want to make sure that you've got your own arguments ready to at least debunk whatever evidence that they come up with of carcinogenicity. Carcinogenicity, is that how you say it?
All
Can
right,
you do it?
Apple. Talk about Apple.
You want to talk about Apple? Sure, let's talk about Apple.
Good.
So,
Kavanaugh, the
Kavanaugh, yeah.
favorite judge of conservatives, of free market. He's gonna, he's a great appointment by, the great Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So,
And here's one of the first things. Now, mind you, we'll keep in mind the stage that they are in the procedure of this lawsuit. It's just allowing it to proceed. It doesn't mean that they're going to win on the merits, but when you allow a baseless lawsuit to proceed, you are costing the company, Apple, tons of money in terms of billable hours for attorneys and, of course,
why is
all
it a
of the
baseless lawsuit, though?
Well, so here's the thing. This is an antitrust lawsuit. Antitrust law, in my view, at least, and I agree, I think you probably share the view with me. Yes, Yaron, that antitrust law is completely invalid.
Immoral.
Yes.
Yes.
Immoral. That it should be allowed for anybody to engage in voluntary transactions, that Apple is not holding a gun to anybody's head. And so, you could say whatever theory you have, but what, antitrust law is built on the idea that somehow you're going to force people to have free competition, that you're going to go after companies if they charge prices that are too high or they charge prices that are too low. It's vague, and it also allows people to go after companies for something that is not a rights violation. So it's got, two strikes against it, in my view. Of course, it was brought in by Republicans, so keep that in mind.
Sherman Act.
Yep, Sherman Antitrust Act, 1890.
So what is this lawsuit? What are the plaintiffs suing Apple for?
So they're suing Apple because they believe that Apple is making too much money and exercising too much control over the apps that are allowed to appear in their store, the App Store for the iPhone.
And why is it an antitrust lawsuit?
So antitrust in the sense that they are a monopoly, and so that the reason that they are able to do these things is because they're exercising monopoly powers.
The only app store for the Apple is the Apple App Store. And they basically want to force Apple to allow other people to start app stores for the
iPhone.
For the iPhone.
So okay, Apple, you are great innovators. You make these beautiful iPhones that are so user-friendly and gorgeous to use and everything else. And, because you made this beautiful product that so many people want, we've decided that we're just going to confiscate part of the wealth that you would have earned otherwise and force you to hand it over to these other people. You have to open it up and allow other people to sell
this is
your creation.
Right? This is what, to some extent, what Microsoft was sued over for antitrust reasons. It was called bundling. You're giving people Windows, but then how dare you bundle with Windows and Internet Explorer for free? And therefore other people can't compete with you on the on selling browsers because you're giving it away for free. And what the lawsuit tried to do, and to some extent succeeded in doing, is forcing Microsoft to unbundle certain of its services. And I think what they're trying to do here is to force Apple to unbundle the Apple Store. Now, note that Microsoft went if you look, it's amazing because Microsoft today, I think, is again the largest corporation in the world by market value. So it went through this period in the early days where it was an incredibly innovative company, an amazing place to work, and became the largest company in the world. Then they got sued, and for about 15 years, they were like, blah, nothing got done. Nobody was excited to work there. They didn't innovate. Surprise, because the government was after them, and they had a government employee who then had to supervise all the decisions Microsoft made. And then I think about 6 years ago, that went away and Microsoft could go back to being Microsoft. And suddenly they're the largest company in the world again because they're innovating. I don't know exactly what they do, but they're innovating. They're producing. People are valuing their product. They're buying their stuff. And there's innovation again. So what does antitrust lawsuits actually do is stifle innovation, stifle progress, destroy the best companies in the world, destroy progress, and hurt everybody involved. And the fact that, the court ruled 5-4 to allow the lawsuit to continue,
Right.
even though the argument was that the plaintiffs didn't have standing and that really there was no antitrust issue even here. And Kavanaugh is the one, not Roberts this time, Kavanaugh is the one, so-called conservatives, who flipped and voted with the left on this issue. So, who needs Kennedy when you have Kavanaugh to flip to the left? So now this case will go to the courts and it will be tried, and another jury somewhere will decide whether Apple is violating antitrust laws and whether these people should be compensated because they paid too high, whatever the hell that means, of a price for their apps.
And then here you don't have, as far as I can tell, the punitive damages, but it says here in the article, successful antitrust plaintiffs are entitled to triple damages. So whatever the actual damages are that you can prove that supposedly, again, how arbitrary could this be? The court or somebody decides what if it was freer and more open, then Apple would charge X amount, in terms of a fee to appear in the App Store, right? And so whatever the damages are that you prove, you can get triple that. But New York Times is happy to point out for you that still Apple has deep pockets. It had $59.5 billion in profit in its last fiscal year. How evil of them that it distributed all of that amongst its shareholders who have invested their life savings. But, let's just forget all that.
Well, and of course, it's not just the people suing who will get compensated. What usually happens in these cases is that everybody who sues, but then everybody who's ever bought an app gets compensated. And the lawyers are the ones who benefit the most from this because we all get a tiny little check for a few dollars, but then the lawyers make out like bandits, but so be it.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. And then, of course, in this article, you see some of the language that we see in other, I'm going to use a phrase that Tucker uses on his show, so-called tech tyranny stories. The tech companies are tyrannical.
Yep.
There's a legal director at something called the Open Markets Institute. Okay, Open Markets Institute. And this is an institute that advocates for stronger antitrust enforcement. Yep. Open markets, stronger antitrust enforcement, more government control and supervision is going to give you more open market, according
they come out of this because in economics class, in classical economics, we're taught that the ideal is something called perfect competition. And when you have perfect competition, all companies are exactly the same. They have the same information, they have the same knowledge, and they charge, at that point, all of us are supposedly better off. So the society maximizing outcome is perfect competition. That is monolithic. Everything's a commodity. Everything's exactly the same. And that is so, I always tell when I talk about economics to economics students, I always say, take that section in the book that talks about monopolies and perfect competition, because it's the same section, right? By the standard of perfect competition, monopolies are bad.
Right.
So take that whole section of the book, rip it out, and put it in the trash, because it is literally damaging for you to read it. It is anti-economics. It's the opposite of economics. It doesn't add anything to economics. It is actually destructive to your ability to comprehend anything in terms of economic theory. It is collectivistic, non-reality, anti-reality garbage.
I got to tell you the parallel that just occurred to me with what you're talking about, this perfect competition. It's analogous to Rawls's theory about coming up with the ideal rules for society. This idea that you're supposed to figure it out behind the veil of ignorance, and that you're a rational being, but otherwise you have no other characteristics at all that distinguish you from anybody else, no values unique to you or anything else. And so therefore you think you're going to figure out what the ideal rules for society are, again, with everybody the same, with no distinguishing characteristic. It must be some sort of product of a Rawlsian
it's the same kind of egalitarianism. Market egalitarianism is where nobody has any control over price. Nobody has any control over the market. There's nothing distinguishing. So Apple is the opposite of perfect competition, because Apple could charge a premium for being Apple. And of course, in a perfectly competitive market, there's no entrepreneurship. There's no innovation. There's no Uber, right? There's no Uber who's trying to distinguish and trying to establish pricing power over a market. It's exactly the opposite of the way a market should and properly does function. And you can look at Silicon Valley, look at the history of Silicon Valley, and you can see that there has never been, and in no situation is there anything approaching what is considered perfect competition, because you can't have innovation and you can't have entrepreneurship. The whole point of an entrepreneur is to have pricing power. The whole point of an entrepreneur is to create something different, something unique, and something therefore that they can charge more for, that they can make money, right? Yes. And it's a theoretical abstraction, but what is the point of a theoretical abstraction that has no capital N connection to reality? It is useless, meaningless, and actually damaging to one's ability to think about economics. And the Austrians, correctly, the Austrian economists correctly criticize neoclassical economics, from which this comes, as useless, and it is useless. This is exactly useless. It has zero practical value. And yes, it comes from the same kind of, it comes from this idea that why bother with reality, right? Let's just deal with floating abstractions. Of course, that's Rawls as well. And it also comes from, yes, a certain sense of egalitarianism, and somehow egalitarian outcomes have to be the ideal.
Yeah, somehow if Apple has done something to distinguish itself, make itself unique and provide a unique value, it's not allowed to charge according to that. It's allowed to charge only according to what all of these other,
See, here's the definition
on the market would be able to create.
Yeah. Here's the definition of perfect markets. All firms sell an identical product. The product is a commodity or homogeneous. All firms are price takers. They cannot influence the market price of their product. Market share has no influence on price. Buyers have complete or perfect information, perfect information. You know everything there is to know, everything. And of course, that is, not only is it bogus, not only can it exist, but you wouldn't want to live in a world where that exists. And it's set up as this is the ideal versus imperfect competition, which is what we have today. But no, what we have today, or what we have when we have real freedom, is perfect competition. And perfect competition is essentially, where companies do have pricing power, where companies do differentiate themselves.
No, I mean, what is the incentive? Because people at Apple said, hey, if we create this awesome value, this value that nobody else has provided before in exactly the same way that we provide it, it might take a lot of work, but we can charge more money and we can get rich from this. And so they want to do it. They want to provide this really cool thing. What is their motive if they're going to be cut off at the kneecaps each time or whatever, this happens? And of course, the New York Times piece criticizes them for, quote, censoring content from the store as well, as if any private company can be a censor. That word is just being thrown around all over the place. It's become meaningless.
Well, everybody's using censor to mean private discrimination. And we know that censorship is something only the government can do. It is an act of force. Censorship is something only the agency that has the monopoly over the use of force can do. Individuals can't censor one another. They can discriminate. They can choose. They can not post your thing, but that's not censorship. And when you confuse terms, I mean, Ayn Rand, hopefully you've read some Ayn Rand out there. And, when you confuse terms, you create this confusion, in this case, between political power and economic power. And if there's anything that we see in the discussion about Facebook and YouTube and all these things, is that even people who claim to be pro-free market have a complete confusion, do not understand the difference between economic power and political power. And they attribute the political power to economic actors, that is the power of the gun, to economic actors.
Yes. I mean, apparently, according to those people that you're referring to, once you create something really awesome and valuable, you lose the freedom of association then that the average person has. Suddenly you should be forced to be dealing with. And now, so let's integrate this with the other pressures that Apple is under right now, in particular, the tariffs on imports from China, and then also the retaliatory tariffs that the Chinese are going to charge, because according to the article, it is, I think, 1/5 of the iPhone sales are in China. So
the tariffs don't apply to iPhones yet. So the tariffs don't apply to all Chinese goods, all goods brought in from China. They only apply to a subsection. I mean, tariffs are just a form of central planning. They're just a form of trying to manipulate the market to favor the industries you like. It's almost never the case that tariffs are uniform and across all of your imports or across all of your inputs. Tariffs are discriminate. So they favor the industries you, as the central planner in chief, in this case, Trump, favors, and they hurt the industries that you, as a central planner, don't favor. And, so I would have a lot less, I'd still be against tariffs, but I would be less offended by tariffs if they were flat and across the board, no exemptions, just everything the same, because then they wouldn't be manipulating behavior above and beyond the tax that you're paying, but they would just be an extra sales tax, right? But that's, of course, not the case. So because of Apple's political power, and because Trump doesn't want to piss off yet, at least, the largest company, or one of the largest companies in the world, they have not put tariffs on Apple products yet, but it's coming. So Trump has said that he wants to expand tariffs to the other $300 billion worth of goods imported into the United States that do not have tariffs now. Mm-hmm. And then I don't think China has yet put tariffs on the iPhones sent back. But who knows what will happen? It's hard to tell, because I don't think that would qualify for tariffs, because it's manufactured in China. It could just be perceived as a Chinese product.
So here's the language that Kavanaugh wrote and signed on. It says, Apple exercises monopoly power in the retail market for the sale of apps and has unlawfully used its monopoly power to force iPhone owners to pay Apple higher than competitive prices for apps. End quote.
Now we have judges who are central planners. Judges.
Yes. Yep.
It's going to hell, but it's been going to hell for a long time. So it's just one more little step in that direction. And of course, it's conservatives who will usher us into hell and make sure that we can't escape. All right. So let's go to the next story.
Okay, so the next story is going to be in our next category. So again, remember, it's money, power, holy roads. The next story is about power, and I've got two on those. The first is, there was a couple of tweets earlier this week, and Trump was talking about, again, the ongoing investigation. and the witch hunt. And there was some lying apparently to the FBI to get the investigation off the ground, right? Or lying by the FBI, right? To get the investigation off the ground. And so, he says hoax, his campaign was being seriously spied upon. This never happened before in American history. It all turned out to be a total scam, a witch hunt that yielded no collusion, no obstruction. And then here's the key language: this must never be allowed to happen again. Okay. So there's an investigation of him.
Yep.
The investigation supposedly turned up nothing.
Yep.
And then he's saying it was done unlawfully. It should never be allowed to happen again.
President have a carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want.
Right. Because this is, here's the thing. So, first of all, the fact that an investigation ends up yielding nothing doesn't mean that it was unlawful or unjustified at the outset.
Well, it's
so
also
that's
not clue that it's not clear because the obstruction charges.
Sure.
It's not even clear.
Yeah.
If they didn't exonerate him.
But let's say, assuming for the sake of argument, right? Because it's that last bit of language that I want to focus on.
No, I agree.
Must never be allowed, right? So first of all, the fact that the investigation turns up nothing doesn't mean that it shouldn't have been done, given the knowledge, the state of knowledge at the time. Then the second thing to think about is, if we've got these existing laws on the books, if it really was unlawful, then what do? You prosecute the people who took unlawful action. So if the investigation was begun because somebody lied, right, to the appropriate authorities, there was a lie in there, then yes, the people who perpetrated the lie, they should be held accountable. But how is it that you're supposed to make sure that this is never allowed to happen again? The only way would be to not allow any sort of discretion to instigate an investigation like this, right? But you have to have it in a system of checks and balances. If we're going to have a system of checks and balances, you're going to have any kind of a robust, meaningful check on executive power, you've got to allow somebody else to have discretion as to whether to start an investigation.
Of course, but Trump doesn't want checks and balances. I mean, that's
and that's the thing. So a lot of people, they don't want to take him literally. He's right. It must never. No, it's even if you prosecute this properly, even if there were people who did bad things and they're brought to justice in this case for starting an invalid investigation according to the current law, even if you do that, it doesn't mean it's never going to happen again, because there's discretion.
Of course.
Human beings are human beings. You have a robust system of checks and balances. And people don't like that. People don't like the fact that both, freedom is messy, right? Oh, Facebook, they're allowed to exercise discretion over their platform. We don't like it because they're not doing what we want. They hate that. They hate the idea that you've got this system of checks and balances that allows certain actors within the system to exercise discretion as to whether to do things, and that sometimes mistakes are made or bad things happen, and you can't redress until after the fact. You cannot make sure that something bad never happens again if you're going to allow people freedom or discretion.
Of course not. And checks and balances are a key feature of the American system of government. Freedom cannot exist without checks and balances. If you cannot investigate the executive branch, then you're not living in a free country. If you cannot criticize the executive branch, if you can't ridicule the executive branch, then you're not living in a free market, in a free society. But of course, Donald Trump has made it clear from the beginning that he doesn't believe he should be ridiculed, that he doesn't believe he should be criticized, and certainly he doesn't believe that he should be investigated. And I'm not saying whether the investigation should have happened to begin with. That is, I'm not saying that there was any credibility.
That's not the point.
Everything. That's not the point. His attitude is the point, and his attitude is consistent with his attitude towards a lot of things. His attitude is authoritarian by its very nature.
That was power number one. Power number two is, and maybe you're going to have more of an opinion on this than I do because you're more up on foreign policy issues. White House said to be reviewing military plans against Iran in echoes of Iraq war. And apparently this is at the behest of Bolton, that they're actually starting to put together a plan in case.
Well, I mean, my guess is, and I don't think it's a big guess, I think it's pretty certain, that the United States has had plans to attack Iran, plans, not intentions, just plans. to attack Iran. It's probably had them for 20 years. It's probably had them since 1979. It's probably had different versions of different plans and different scenarios. They probably trained on it. So, you know, it would be shocking to me that the United States doesn't update its plan vis-a-vis Iran every year or every couple of years, because Iran has been a threat to United States interests since 1979. And the United States hopefully has a plan to deal with every potential enemy out there in the world, including this. So to some extent, this is a stupid headline, you know, White House reviews military plans against Iran. Well, good. I mean, they should be all the time, constantly, because Iran is any point in time could be a significant threat, and therefore execute. And now in general, I have a view about Iran, and I think that I've said for decades now, I guess I could say for decades, that the Iranian regime should be the one regime in the world, or maybe one of two regimes in the world that I think the United States should overthrow, is the Iranian regime and probably the Saudi regime. Are the two regimes that I think the United States should overthrow. Now, I don't believe the United States will. I don't believe the United States knows how to. I'm not talking about militarily. Militarily would be relatively easy. I'm talking about politically and morally, and what to do once you take it over. I don't think the United States really has all that capacity. Now, granted, John Bolton is good, I think, on these issues. I think he's good on the Middle East. I think if anybody was going to run this, Bolton is not a bad guy to have running it. But I don't trust anybody else in this administration to manage an Iranian war properly. Mm-hmm. And in addition, and if you add to that, right now, if you read a little bit about Iran, there's a lot of upheaval in Iran right now. There's a lot of upheaval. There's a lot of students in the streets. There was recently a big demonstration in a university of women who are burning their burqas. And what I would do if I were, you know, if anybody asked me, is I would try to foment more civil unrest. I would try to do whatever I could to support those people in civil unrest, and really do everything in my power to not go to war, and instead see a civilian revolution, a revolution within Iran that took out the mullahs and replaced the regime. I think we came very close to that in 2009, and Obama completely failed the Iranian people and the American people and future generations by basically not willing to take sides. And one would hope that Trump will be willing to take sides in this case and provide the moral. Problem is, nobody takes Donald Trump as a moral leader, but it would be great if you had a moral leader who said, yes, you're fighting for freedom, go fight for freedom. We are supportive. We believe you are right. The regime is evil. They're the evil empire. And we support fully, morally, all these other countries. I just don't think that that Trump could pull that off. But
he sometimes says a few good out of context things. For example, about Venezuela, right?
Other people write his speeches, primarily John Bolton writes his speeches, then they're pretty good. And so I think it's about time we had a confrontation with Iran. Again, I just don't trust this administration or any administration to do it right. Bush certainly didn't do it right. Obama was pathetic. And I have no reason to believe Trump knows what he's doing, other than John Bolton is somebody I respect in terms of the Middle East. I'll add one thing.
Just keep him away from Snowden, sorry.
Yeah. Somebody asked about North Korea. I don't consider North Korea a threat to the United States, an imminent threat that needs military intervention. North Korea needs to be starved to death, and anti-ballistic missile technology needs to be deployed to knock the missiles out of the air. And if there's indications that they're truly targeting California or targeting the United States, then you annihilate them. But I really think that Iran is a much bigger threat, potentially because of its ideology, the ideology that is behind it, right? Mm-hmm. North Korea does not want to lose. Iran, at least some people in Iran, don't mind losing because they get to go to heaven, right? If they die. The North Koreans, doesn't work with communists, doesn't work that way. So I don't think North Korea is serious about going to war with the U.S. That's why I thought
they're not as suicidal, in other words.
no, and also, I thought that was what made even worse the groveling of Donald Trump in front of the North Koreans, is that they're not even worth it. They're not a threat. They're not somebody who you need to negotiate. You need to just leave them alone to starve by themselves and just withdraw sanction from them. Don't trade with them. Don't allow anybody to trade with them. That's enough. That's enough.
Right. So that is the power. Sometimes when he starts talking about military stuff, I mean, in this case, it's not Trump out there tweeting and everything, so I'm not going to bring in my 1984 parallels. But when Trump is out there talking about this country being enemy or that country being, I love to bring in the Eurasia, East Asia, endless war sort of thing that goes on in 1984.
Authoritarians always need an enemy. Donald Trump has exemplified this beautifully, right? He's not an authoritarian because he can't get away with it, but he has the mentality of, and he exemplified it beautifully by creating enemies. The enemy is China on trade, our economic enemy, supposedly economic enemy is if there is. And then the enemy is Mexicans, the enemy is immigrants, the enemies are elites, the enemy is the media. But Donald Trump loves enemies and he rallies, that is the thing that rallies people to support him more than anything else, is the hatred of the other, the hatred of those people who are manipulating things from behind the curtain, those people who look differently than us and who therefore are driving, don't have our best interest in mind. And and trade, of course, somehow becomes a weapon. To trade with somebody is to help somebody, not to hurt somebody. The more you trade to something, the more you're helping somebody. China, by trading with us, is helping us, not hurting us. And we're helping them by trading with them. So trade is win-win, particularly the kind of economic trade we do with China.
So that is the power segment. And now we're going to holy roads.
Holy roads.
Holy roads. None of the above. Duran Duran says no, none of the above. It's a brilliant song. Brilliant song.
Victory after victory. Victory after victory. Yes. Holy power, holy roads.
Holy roads. And so Laban in the lyrics also rejects the holy roads. He rejects, he's atheist as well, outspoken atheist. So
yeah, but he's talking about faith in none of the above. Freedom puts faith in none of the above.
Right, but he's actually out there published as kind of an advocate atheist. They've interviewed him about his atheism, etc. So he's a little more intellectual than you would give him credit for. Plus, I've met him in person. You haven't, Yaron. So I'm going to do some ad hominem on you right there. Huh?
Amy grew up in a different musical era than I did, so we don't necessarily have the same values when it comes to popular music. But somebody did ask before we get to holy roads, okay. Super chat question about your favorite music bands and favorite paintings. Do you have favorite music bands?
Well, of course I've got so Duran Duran is one of them. I've got the link in the notes, right? So I like Duran Duran probably from junior high. Certainly all through high school. I was talking about it this weekend with a high school friend. But now, I mean, I kind of evolved later and got into a lot of what we call alternative stuff. So Radiohead, Muse, the Jezebels is this fairly lesser known band really from Australia that I learned about through the sport dog agility that I used to compete in. You can actually see behind me now, I've got some pictures on here.
Jezebels. We see the Jezebels.
We got the Jezebels, but above the Jezebels, I've got Boo. Boo was my my agility competing dog, and there was a beautiful dog trainer, Sylvia Turkman, who had a video, and she put a Jezebel song behind her video, and that's how I learned about them, just through a dog agility video. But anyway, they're very, very talented band, but they tend to appeal to people like me who liked bands like Duran Duran. First record I bought was Blondie, a lot of Blondie. I don't know. Got a lot of cool stuff.
Right, that's who's mine.
That's mine.
What paintings? You have favorite paintings?
Okay, so I don't have favorite paintings as much. I mean, I have some favorite paintings, but I'm more into sculpture in the last several years. And I got onto this because I saw a picture of a sculpture by Stefan Sinding. Sinding is how you spell it. And once I saw this picture, I had to track it down. And thankfully, the Cordaires, who run the Cordaire Gallery in Napa, helped me track it down and find that it was in Copenhagen and that you could actually see it if you go to Carlsberg Museum. This is my favorite piece in the whole world, and you have to make a special tour and then you go see it. So I saw that. There's a whole bunch of his other pieces in Glyptoteket, which is the big museum in Copenhagen. So Sinding. And then now I've gotten into a sculptor named Gascombe John. William Gascombe John, I believe is his first name, William. And he's got a bunch of pieces all throughout the UK. I happened to see the piece that he regarded as his best on a fluke. I just encountered it just in random at a botanic garden in Glasgow.
Wow.
Just saw this piece and went, wow, and then found out about this whole thing. So I have to go see a whole bunch of his other pieces. Yeah. Godfrey Joseph, longtime objectivist, has tons of pictures of his stuff, and I want to go do that. Bernini as well, of course, beautiful pieces. So favorite sculptors I have more than paintings.
All right.
What about you?
Bands, music, I'm old fashioned. The Beatles and I don't know, Pink Floyd, but I'm much more into classical music than I am into kind of popular music. Paintings, I love a lot of paintings, anywhere from some of the great Renaissance paintings to my favorite is 19th century, generally 19th century academic French and academic British painters. So anywhere from Leighton to Jerome to some Bouguereau, there's just a lot. There's a lot of painting that I like. And of course, as you know, I too love sculpture, and we have a ton of sculpture here in Puerto Rico, as well as in our house in California.
Well, and you also have a very talented sculptor in-house.
I have a wife who sculpts. So yes, we have some of our original sculptures in both places. Okay, two more quick super chat questions, and then we'll go to the last section, which is holy moly something. Why does China buy US Treasuries instead of gold? Simply because Treasuries are more liquid than gold. There's a much bigger market in Treasuries than gold. You can go in and out of them easily without changing prices. It's incredibly liquid. And also you get interest on Treasuries. Gold, you get no interest. Gold just sits there. It doesn't increase in value. So Treasuries, actually, you get compensated interest for them. And, we could have a whole discussion about money versus gold or fiat money versus gold and the relationship between gold price and Treasuries and all of that. But the fact is that if you're trying to invest hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe even trillions of dollars, then buying gold is just not very practical. How do you get rid of it? If you want to turn it into cash, who's going to buy it from you? So U.S. Treasuries is what almost everybody, not just the Chinese, but the Japanese, the British, everybody holds their foreign reserves in U.S. Treasuries. The other reason, so that's the comparison to gold. Capitalist Nick asks, is Biden pragmatism more tolerable than Trump's? Well, it depends what you mean by that. I mean, Trump is more of a pragmatist than Biden. I don't think there's ever been anybody that I know of who is more of a pragmatist than Trump. Trump believes literally in nothing except his success, however he defines success at the moment. So I don't think there's anybody who acts pragmatically more than I think Donald Trump does in politics, as far as I know. Right. So I think that's, I find it fascinating.
In speeches, you hear him explicitly reject ideology in favor of getting things done or what works, etc. He explicitly rejects any
Absolutely.
sort of
Absolutely.
And if you read, again, his inauguration address, not one mention of the principle on which our country was founded.
No, and he never does. He never mentions the founding of the Constitution, and if he does, it's just because he doesn't get it. He doesn't care about it. It's not important. It's getting the job done. That's what's important, and getting the job done is fulfilling your short-term, whatever the
listening to those voices that have been ignored, which is such typical pragmatist language. Satisfying.
Biden is an everyday run-of-the-mill pragmatist. everyday run-of-the-mill centrist with no. I think Biden will do less damage than Trump long term. But look, I'm not pro-Biden. I think Biden is awful. I think he's stupid. I think he'll cater to the left because that's where the principles are. So you move leftwards. No, I mean, Biden is an awful alternative to Trump, but in terms of damage, I think he is less damaging because he at least, well, for all the reasons I've mentioned about Trump. And by the way, just because I'm reading the chat, which I probably shouldn't do, but just to give you a sample of the way people distort what I say, and they don't listen. Somebody writes, did Yaron just say who would buy gold? Now, what context did I say that?
In the context where you have tons and tons of money. I was listening to
hundreds of billions and billions of dollars, and you want to have liquidity, and you want to have easy convertibility. I said you wouldn't buy gold, but I didn't say you shouldn't buy gold. I didn't give general advice, don't buy gold. I mean, that is exactly the way people hear me talk about Trump. They take everything I say completely out of the context and completely distort it and to make me look as bad as possible. It's really amazing. Anyway, that was just an aside, which I shouldn't have done because I keep getting told by people who listen to the podcast that I shouldn't pay any attention to the chat. But I enjoy it because it makes it more real to me that there are people commenting. It's almost like being in a classroom and seeing people's responses. So I like doing live shows versus just taping them. I could just tape them, but I like actually doing live shows. It's more enjoyable in spite of the fact that it's distracting. It's often pisses me off to no end. And at least 20% of the comments are just completely nuts. And you guys who are nuts know it. All right, Amy, let's get to religion because we're running late.
Actually, and this is the thing, I didn't check with you again before we went on, but my little thing that came up that made me have to start an hour earlier then ended up being no big deal. And so now I'm not crunched on time as I would have been before. So we're okay. We can talk about the Holy Rose, which you keep calling something else. But
scares the bejesus out of me. I'm scared of the Holy Rose. Because I think
but you're going to see that these stories are very much worth discussing. And again, this is something that anybody as an atheist who believes in a robust separation of church from state should be concerned about. The first story is a conservative Christian group is pushing Bible classes in public schools nationwide, and it's working. So they start out with anecdotal stories, 2 different school districts in Kentucky, and where they're teaching lessons from the Gospels and everything else. And it says scenes of Bible classes in public school could become increasingly common across the United States if other states follow Kentucky's lead in passing legislation that encourages high schools to teach the Bible. Now, in general, Yaron, do you have an objection to a school teaching the Bible in some sort of form?
How can I have an objection to it? I mean, this is the problem, right? It's a public school. Right. It's supposed to represent the public. And if the public is mainly very religious people, and they want the book taught, not as propaganda necessarily, but as for knowledge, for general knowledge, as the Bible. I mean, I don't see how it's the same thing about creationism, right? If teachers in a particular district, if parents in a particular district want their kids to learn the creationism, and it's a public school, then the public gets to decide. And this is why, and the problem is, of course, the minority, right, is the ones that are penalized for that because they don't want it. It's the majority determines. But that's why this is one more reason, one of the biggest reasons, not to have public schools.
Or let's use the language that I prefer for this, government schools. Let's keep because this is what they are. Government has a monopoly in this country on education in the sense that everybody is compelled to pay for this, whether or not you use it at least, right?
Yes, and then the majority gets to decide what your kid will learn. And if the majority happens to be nutty Christian, then your kid will learn nutty Christian stuff. And that is, or nutty Muslim stuff, or nutty whatever. But the nice thing about private schools is if you're a nutty Christian, you can have your nutty Christian school. If you're a nutty Muslim, you can have your nutty Muslim school. If you're a nutty atheist or nutty atheist,
Scientologist.
or Scientologist, you can have your schools. And parents get to decide what a concept, what school they get to go to, and the market, adjudicates all of this. And we don't have this, some Bible group imposing on my kids what my kids should study because they happen to be the majority, or they have more political influence at any given point in time. So my main concern about this is that that public education inherently is a violation of rights, and therefore this religion, the separation of religion and government is inevitably going to go away or disappear when you have situations like public schools in areas that are dominated by a particular religion. I mean, what do you think? In Utah, schools don't teach anything related to Mormonism? Of course they do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the teachers figure out how to slip it in different places, right? But now we've got a president, of course, who is in favor of this. So if you want to just talk about what could be the difference if you have a Biden versus a Trump pragmatism, Trump was out there on Twitter saying, numerous states introducing Bible literacy classes, giving students the option of studying the Bible, starting to make a turn back. Great. So he's, giving the endorsement, and a lot of the proponents of Bible instruction, as they're calling it, are thrilled to have the endorsement of the president. He says, quote, when the president of the United States gives us a shout out, that's pretty crazy. It's got the momentum now.
It's his voter base. It's the evangelicals. And let me tell you, I mean, I know a lot of people in America today believe that religion is in decline, and that, the whole dim hypothesis, Leonard's wrong about it because religion's in decline. Well, first, Leonard didn't predict that religion would take over within 5 years of writing the book. He predicted 40 years. So you can't say anything. You can't say anything about Leonard's prediction until the 40 years are up, at least. You certainly can't extrapolate from the short term into the long run. But I would argue that religion is not in decline. Religion is more powerful than ever. Donald Trump is going to help it become even more powerful because he is cultivating them. He is giving them a lot of power and a lot of moral kind of backing, in spite of the fact that he's probably an atheist. But he is using the evangelical community and emboldening the evangelical community. And it's one of the things, of the many things he does, that is very, very damaging as president.
Yeah. But yeah, overall, the biggest thing to say about something like this is once you have government schools, it's going to be inevitable that there's going to be a majority rule component to figuring out how those schools are run in terms of policies, what the content's going to be in the curriculum, et cetera. And this is just a natural outgrowth of it now that you've got Republicans in power in a lot more places, and you've got this endorsement from the president as well. So we'll see what happens. Then we have something that the president has more direct control over, because again, this is a state by state issue right now where Kentucky and some other states have voted this in. Supreme Court liberals are now raising alarm bells about Roe versus Wade. And we've seen little echoes of this coming, but now we've got Kavanaugh on the court. So with Kavanaugh, we might get the worst of all worlds. In the one sense, we're getting him to be a swing vote on something like antitrust.
It's hard to tell also how Roberts will vote on Roe versus Wade. So it's hard to tell exactly. But there's no question in my mind that the Supreme Court will erode the abortion rights, that it will move us away from freedom here. Whether they completely do away with Roe versus Wade or not, I think abortion is under threat. What's going to happen in this country, I think, longer term, is that abortion is going to be left up to the states. I think it will be a state by state thing, and it's going to be sad. Going to be sad that some people are going to be stuck in states where they cannot have an abortion, or where they have to get into a car or fly in a plane to a place that has abortions. And of course, this will hurt poor women more than anybody else. The people who can least afford it will be hurt the most by it because they'll have the fewest options. And but I think we're heading in a direction, absolutely, where abortion will be banned, will be left to the states, where the Supreme Court at some point, whether now or in 10 years, the Supreme Court will at some point say Roe versus Wade is bad law. We'll setting it aside and let the states democratically decide.
Yeah, apparently the issue here is a fairly abstract one as to the deference that must be granted to precedent. So once you say Roe versus Wade, this long-standing precedent doesn't have to be granted the deference that it once was, then you have open season on it. But
well,
I had
not giving as much deference for precedent, so I think that's a good thing. I mean, indeed, it's unclear in regard to the Apple lawsuit whether the liberals were right in that case because of precedent. So I'm all for getting rid of precedent, or at least having less respect for precedent and questioning precedent. But in this case, it's gonna go against us, particularly given that Roe versus Wade was badly argued, right, and was not based on real constitutional principles.
It's a tricky issue, and I want to revisit what Tara Smith has to say about this, because when you talk about legal precedent, you're talking about the rule of law in terms of stability, predictability, that people know what they're facing. And if there is, if you erode entirely respect for precedent, then there's no predictability. But then if you make precedent impossible to overturn, then you're going to allow an injustice to continue to be perpetrated when people, learn to recognize something as unjust, right?
I mean, transitions from statism to freedom are messy.
Yeah.
And I don't see any alternative. Now, it's true that 100 years ago, yes, I think you should have respected precedent, and maybe 75 years ago, you respected precedent. It's too late. I mean, we live in a world in which the precedents are so bad, are so in opposition to the Constitution, that I think radical change is necessary. And yeah, it's not predictable, tough. And maybe the solution is that the court actually says, look, this is bad law, but we ask Congress to figure out how to phase it out, or we do something like that. And if they don't phase it out, we will revisit this and eliminate the law. So maybe there's something where the judicial branch can make a recommendation to the legislative branch to phase stuff out. But you cannot uphold immoral, bad law because it's precedent for the sake of upholding it, for the sake of tradition, particularly when so much of the law today, in my view at least, is bad.
No, and that's the tricky issue. And besides this issue of respect for precedent, which I guess is at risk, there is another undercurrent that's been going on for a long time, and it's something that I had the opportunity to preview and write about years ago. There was a guy named Hadley Arks, and he wrote a book called Natural Rights and the Right to Choose. And he talked about a deliberate strategy by religious conservatives to undermine Roe versus Wade, using the theory within Roe versus Wade itself. So talk about pragmatism. Roe versus Wade is the epitome of a legal pragmatic decision where they have this, this balancing test of the interest of the state in potential life versus the interest of the woman in privacy, as they put it. And what they ended up looking at, what the court ended up looking at in Roe versus Wade, were things like, how often do state governments, federal government, et cetera, how often do they treat a fetus as a person?
Yep.
And so people like George W. Bush, for example, spent a lot of time creating new regulations and laws in which a fetus was treated as a person. So it might be something as mundane as, some sort of a Medicaid provision that gives person-like benefits to a fetus, but point is that little by little in state law and federal law, you put on the books, for example, if a woman is murdered and then there's also an unborn fetus that she's carrying, then do you count it as a double murder or not? So those sorts of issues. And slowly but surely, these religious conservatives have increased the number of laws in our country where a fetus is treated as a person, such that even if you were to respect precedent, you get enough conservatives on the court and they're willing to do this, again, the balancing test, it's apples and oranges. It's, sort of like doing the Bentham utilitarian calculus. How do you quantify, et cetera? But they're going to come out, even respecting Roe versus Wade. They do this balancing test. They look at the factors. The factors have changed.
No, I think that's right. I think they're winning. And I think that the people saying, oh, we're never going to have religious-based authoritarianism in America because religion's on decline. You're very, very wrong. I still think the greatest threat to America is long-term the religious, whether it's religious right or religious left. We'll see how it evolves. But people animated by religion are ultimately going to be the people who lead us into authoritarianism, into the end of America as we know it. And again, I don't think it's an accident that it was the religionists who voted overwhelmingly for Trump. They're the ones who gave him the primaries. He beat Ted Cruz in South Carolina in evangelical strongholds because he dominated the evangelical vote. Why? Because I think evangelicals want somebody to tell them the truth. That's the nature. Religion is epistemologically authoritarian, and they want to be told. And I think that's Donald Trump played to that mentality brilliantly. That's the one thing he's brilliant at is marketing. He knows his audience and he knows what to give to them. So I'm not surprised he has gone out and supports Bible classes and will probably support overturning Roe versus Wade. Although
of course he supports that, I think. Yeah.
What's that?
Of course he supports that.
He used to be pro-abortion, but he's not anymore. The only person there who might stop him is his daughter, who supposedly is pro-abortion, but who knows? All right, we got one more super chat question on economics, and then I think we're done, right? We covered all the topics. You can summarize the connection between them all. China is the largest holder of US Treasuries as part of the trade war with Trump. What if it dumped their holdings? Wouldn't it create chaos for the United States? China dumping, it's the same thing. It's like this whole trade war. It's like lose. Nobody wins, right? So imagine China was trying to dump its holdings of US Treasury. What would happen to the price of US Treasuries? They would plummet. So China would lose a lot of money by dumping US Treasuries. And of course, what would they get in exchange for US Treasuries? They would get dollar bills. And what are they going to do with the dollar bills, right? Dollar bills, digital equivalent of dollar bills. What are they going to do with the dollar bills? What can they do with the dollar bills? They're going to sell them to whom? For what? What are they going to get in exchange for them? They're going to use them to buy American goods? No, they don't want American goods, it turns out. That's why they bought Treasuries to begin with. Are they going to buy American real estate? Are they going to go and buy gold? Unlikely, right? Unlikely that they buy gold. And again, there's the quantity and the liquidity problem with gold. All right, so they'll go into the foreign exchange market and exchange it into something else. So they'll massively sell all their dollars. Well, what will happen when they sell all their dollars? The value of the dollar will plummet. So they'll lose a huge amount of money again. So, these things are, it's just insanity in my view, the way people think about this, as if China is going to do us harm by selling their treasuries. No, they'll do themselves harm. Yes, they'll create havoc and they'll do America harm as well. But yeah, this is the whole thing with tariffs. I'll shoot myself in the foot. Okay, so I'll shoot myself in the foot. So no, but okay, I'll up you one. I'll shoot myself in the knee. Oh no, I'm going to shoot myself in the stomach. And then one day, one of these parties are going to shoot themselves in the heart. And they're going to kill, and this is how we got into Great Depression in the 1930s. And it's quite possible that this kind of stupidity on the part of the Chinese and the Americans is going to lead us down the same rabbit hole. So, if I were the Chinese and Donald Trump put tariffs on me, I would say, on my goods, I would say, you're screwing your own citizens. That's kind of stupid, Donald Trump. We're not going to do that. We're actually going to unilaterally lower our tariffs in China because we love our people.
My term for his trade policy, right?
Yeah.
It's not free trade, it's Pharaoh trade.
Pharaoh
I
trade?
did a whole show that I called Pharaoh Trade. And the idea was that, like the Pharaoh in Egypt, who had all of these specially selected and paid people, actually, they weren't actually slaves. Did you hear that? But they were specially selected people who were paid to build the pyramids for the glory of the Pharaoh. And similarly, Trump is handpicking his crony favorite segments of the economy to build not necessarily a trade surplus, but at least build us out of our trade deficit, right? So, he thinks he's going to, build something to the glory of him, which is to eliminate the trade deficit. That's going to show how great he is because
It's
he's
not a bad thing.
eliminated.
Trade deficits are good.
Exactly. No, exactly. It's ridiculous. I mean, building the pyramids were kind of arbitrary as well, but it was for the glory of the Pharaoh. And so
slaves. I mean, I'm Jewish and it's ingrained in my genes. It's like inscribed in my genes.
I'll have to find you the reference, Yaron, but at the time when I did the research for the show, they said no, it wasn't slaves, that it was actually specially selected people who were paid to do it. And that's what we have now. US Steel.
My group identity, it's very sensitive. And, our identity is built around the idea that we were slaves.
Should we get you a safe space, Yaron?
And yes, and Moses.
Isn't Puerto Rico a good enough safe space? I mean, you are so far away.
God freed us from the slavery, and you can't. There's a whole holiday called Passover around this, and now you want to challenge.
Passover is around the fact that the pyramids were built on slave labor.
Yeah.
Oh.
Passover is about the Jews being enslaved in Egypt, and Passover is the holiday that celebrates God basically slaughtering the firstborn of every Egyptian family as punishment for the Egyptians not freeing their slaves. And after he does that, Pharaoh decides to let the Jews go, let the slaves go, and they flee. And then he changes his mind and he chases them. And they come to the Red Sea and they're stuck, and they've got the Egyptian army behind them and the Red Sea in front of them. So God performs a miracle and he parts the Red Sea and they walk through. And then when the Egyptians get there and they go in, he floods them and he kills the entire Egyptian army. I mean, God is quite a murderous. But
okay, they're slaves. They were slaves, okay, but were they slaves who built pyramids?
Well, I mean, what did they do? I mean, what were we doing?
I'll find you the reference.
What were my people doing in Egypt for hundreds of years if they didn't build the pyramids? I mean, that's what we did.
That's all slaves could do?
Don't diminish the achievements of our slavery. I mean,
I can only tell you what I read. I can only tell you what I read, and there had been a study that said no, it wasn't slaves.
Targeted at diminishing Jewish identity. I'm telling you.
You think it is? I don't see the logic. I just don't see the. Maybe it's late and I'm tired, but I just don't see the logic. Anyway,
as a Jewish slave, I can see the headline tomorrow on Facebook.
But you get the parallel, right? So it's for the glory of Trump, we must eliminate the evil trade deficit. He's going to select the chosen companies whose products will be protected, and therefore is going to help counterbalance the evil trade deficit, at least eliminate the deficit, if not create a surplus. Imagine if he had a surplus to go around bragging about, right? He'd think he was the greatest.
I mean, he can't get a surplus unless the only way he can get a surplus is if he drives the U.S. economy into major recessions. Recessions are the best way to reduce two things that Donald Trump hates. It eliminates immigration because nobody wants to come to a country in the midst of a recession. And it eliminates trade deficits because Americans become too poor to buy stuff from overseas. So the best thing to eliminate immigration and reduce trade deficits is a recession. So that's the only way he's going to get his wish.
Well, that would be sad. So am I going to sum up here?
There was something else I want to say before we sum up.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I want to say about the Treasury stuff. Economics is to really do economics, you have to think of third, fourth level, the unseen, as Bastiat would call it, called it. And it's hard. It's not easy. And what most of what you read about economics in the press, including the financial press, like the Wall Street Journal, is just plain wrong. They're not good economists. They don't understand the second, third level effects. And so all this speculation about China dumping the dollar, I mean, and stuff like that, never are we told what are they dumping it for? What are they going to take instead of it? Never are we told what impact that has on their own wealth, in a sense, the extent that their wealth is tied up in treasuries. And of course, again, the other way in which they would dump treasuries, and the way not to penalize us, but if we stopped importing Chinese goods, if we really, really reduced dramatically the importation of Chinese goods, then China would stop having access to dollars. And therefore they would stop buying treasuries unless they use some of the yen to convert it into dollars. And then they would raise the value of the dollar through their demand for dollars and then go buy treasuries that way. And that's probably what would happen, right? And the trade deficit would come back because we'd have stronger dollars buying even cheaper Chinese goods now. So, I mean, economics is this amazing dynamic thing where you push a lever here. There are 5 other things that are going on that happen. And you can't just look at, if I push this lever, this goes up. Yeah, but this goes up, which then causes that to go down, which causes that. And then the original thing might go the other direction. It's a complicated, they use not the yen, sorry, yuan. I probably don't pronounce it right. Yuan is what the Chinese use, Y-U-A-N, not yen, which is the Japanese Y-E-N.
Right.
All right, I'm done. Summarize.
Okay. So this is none of the above, in the sense of nothing above the individual, and the things that we are rejecting as above the individual are this idea that you're going to seek big money verdicts against evil companies actually just doing business out there. We're going to reject this idea that, you got to go after money against evil corporations. So money, power, unchecked executive power, or military power that's just wielded in order to keep everybody patriotic and willing to be subjugated. That sort of stuff is what we were talking about. Although I guess Iran doesn't fit neatly into that box, because Iran is a real enemy. It's not like China and the other ones that he trumps up, but that's the box for military. And then holy roads, the idea of putting religious doctrine or faith above the right of the individual to determine education for his children, to determine what she wants to do. In the case of abortion, a woman wants to do with her own body. It is religious doctrine that upholds that a fetus should have the same rights as a person. It is the only thing that would talk about, for instance, any sort of human being at conception existing. So money, power, holy roads, freedom is going to reject all of this.
There has to be some good news out there. Anything good?
So any of the good news out there, what did I actually say
Game
was
of
good?
Thrones is ending.
Hmm?
I haven't seen this season, so I don't know what to tell you guys, but
Shapiro has been writing about Game of Thrones, but I don't read those because I might actually watch it, and I haven't watched it yet. So
I need to finish the season because a lot of people want me to do a review of it. I want to watch it on my big screen in California, but I'm gonna have to watch it on a little screen just to catch up with the story, so I can critique, so I can give a review of it. Because by the time I watch it in California, there'll be no interest in what Yaron Brook thinks about Game of Thrones, right? Because it'll be all history. I might, on my trip to Japan, just binge watch season 8 of Game of Thrones and then give you my review from Asia. How about that?
okay.
That's the only good news I have, is Game of Thrones is almost over from what I hear.
I mean, the fact that Textbook of Americanism exists and that we were doing this panel and that Heartland had us and we had a sold out.
Heartland is great. I love it.
That was, we had a sold out event there at Heartland, and I thought that was quite.
All right, if anybody out there lives in Asia, I'm coming to Asia. So look up, you can find all the information on my website, yaronbrookshow.com/ I don't know what / but events, I think, /events, or just go to appearances on the tag. As I said in the beginning of the show, I am going to be doing a seminar workshop, Train the Speaker Weekend Workshop on public speaking. So if you want to learn how to be a world-class public speaker like me, and I am a world-class public speaker, then I will teach you tricks. They're not tricks. I will teach you the content of the trade, what it is required in order to be a good speaker. We'll talk about how to prepare a presentation, how to guard your audience, presentation techniques, how to gain confidence, and how to open a talk and close the talk effectively. That will be on July 19th, that weekend in Miami, at a hotel in Miami. It is $1,500 a person, so it's not cheap, but it is. Corporate seminars cost a lot more than that. I hope it's going to be small, 10 to 15 people. If I don't get 10, I'm going to cancel it, and it won't take more than 15. So hopefully some of you are interested. You can sign up. Send me an email, yaron@yaronbrookshow.com, and I'll send you a link to sign up. And then finally, there's another super chat question. Thoughts on minimalism in contemporary classical music? Do you enjoy Steve Reich, one of the great American artists, in my opinion? No, no, no. I don't think there is such a thing as minimalist classical music. I'm not sure it's music at all. And I don't like Stephen Reich. And I'd have to go back and remember what he actually composed, but no, that whole genre of so-called modern or contemporary classical music, almost all of it is, in my view, really, really bad. I can't prove it. I can't prove that it's not music because I don't have the vocabulary or the tools in terms of music. But no, to me, the last great American composers were a long, long time ago, and they were almost all immigrants to the United States. No, that's not true. The only good American composers, great American composers who are still writing are the people who write music for movies. There's some really good movies for music. Music for movies, not music for movies. Blah. Go ahead.
I have, in this time that you've been speaking, scrolled through my Facebook feed looking for a positive story.
You didn't find one?
I found one, but I had to go all the way back to April 30th to find it.
Right.
And I was posting a New York Times opinion piece in their privacy series. And there was, I believe, a woman who was writing, it's been a while since I've read this piece, but back April 30th, who talked about the reasonable expectation of privacy test being rooted in pragmatism and having trouble. That was the last time I posted a actual positive piece of news, Yaron. So now you have got me, you're going to program me to seek out some positive news for next time.
Every day you should post one post of positive news. I should do
I'm going to try. Maybe I have to go back to News Sandwich because News Sandwich is a formula that forces me to find good news, because I have positive things in my feed, but they are flower pictures, music, pictures of artworks, right?
All the time, the new achievements, the people doing amazing things.
There are.
There's a lot of positive. All right.
There are.
We should go. It's been an hour and 40 minutes.
Thank you, sir.
We should let our audience go to bed and
to
all
eat
right,
and
thank you.
all those things.
It's still early in California, so you've got plenty of time. All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir.
I'm off to Asia. Bye.
Be safe.
Bye.
Have fun.